H.C. Attwell is a best-selling science fiction dystopian author. She's a member of the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Association. The first book in her series, Estes, was a 2021 finalist for the Kindle Book Award and is an SPSFC2 quarter finalist. In her free time, she also does photography and archery. She lives in the Boston area. SC, over to you.
Thank you so much for having me. So I'm reading from my first book. It's just one of a duology. It's a bit blurry, sorry. And this is chapter 19. This is not the main character, but this is Wickford, one of the patrol agents who is regretting his decision to go above ground. They lined up along the ridge and crouched, silent shadows, staring down into the valley. They made sure to check that the moon was on the other side of the sky, so they couldn't easily be seen. The elevator felt very far away. They can see you in the dark. It was true, knew Wickford, but they could try to keep the advantage. Up here, the wind was blasting harshly, warm even at night, and very dry. The only vegetation around was deep in the canyons, where there was water. The ridge was clean of cover, burned during the day, wind-scoured at night. Water, Schoolis murmured. They obediently took a swig from their canisters. It had to be timed to keep them all sufficiently rationed to make the full loop of whatever mission Council had sent them on this time. Wickford had only been on one of these above-ground missions before, though he'd fought alongside Schoolis and Henry down in the tunnels for the past year. Commander Schoolis never told them much, just gave them brief orders before they moved out. Usually the above-ground patrol went through the canyons, driving out any alar they could find, or so Henry had explained when Wickford had volunteered for duty. And he'd only done it on a dare, from Henry, of course, who'd called him a chicken in the mess hall in front of everyone, saying tunnel duty was for patrolettes. Newbies, Wickford thought sourly. But fighting Olar on their home turf was sounding less and less great with every minute that passed, as it dawned on him that they might be actually going into the canyons. The stars might be beautiful, and cool air was always welcome, but he thought that he strongly preferred the tunnels. That way your enemy was only on one side of you. He kept his thoughts to himself and off his face. The commander was frighteningly good at noticing any dissent. Schoolis raised a hand suddenly, mask shining eerily in the moonlight. Quadrant 4, he whispered into his comm. Do you copy? A faint buzzing that meant copy. Schoolis whispered something into his comm. Then he resumed his study of the valley below. The ridge they were standing on was vertically edged along the eastern face. Flat sides sloped, notched with half-formed caves, to the valley floor. The wind hissed in the sand. Below them, the valley spread out in a semicircle, pocked with holes and rivulets where flash floods had carved their way over the centuries. When it rained here, it poured, Wickford knew. Patrol lost a man or two every year to it. He glanced at the sky. It was clear. Beyond the flat valley, the canyon entrances yawned, parallel gashes in the earth. They wound their way toward the horizon. The Olar, that's where the caves began. The canyons were pitch black. Patrol would be at a huge disadvantage against creatures that could see in the dark. Wickford shivered, suddenly deeply regretting whatever it was he'd signed up for. Last time had been a routine patrol of the general perimeter of the city's multiple tunnel entrances, far away from any canyons. This time, he wasn't sure, and he hated that. Schoolis was still silent. He appeared to be thinking. Wickford adjusted his water pack, wincing at the sloshing sound. Henry shot him a look. They made their way single file down the ridge. Wickford moved slowly, trailing after the group, trying not to make noise as his feet scraped the gravelly sandstone. Every so often, Henry would glance back at him. Wickford guessed Pricey was paying attention, was probably thinking how incompetent Wickford was that Henry had to check on him, but he didn't care. Henry and Wickford had been best friends since 6th grade. Henry had insisted they join patrol together, even though Wickford was slower, clumsier, and louder, he thought, wincing. But he gave Henry a thumbs up and tried not to trip on the rocks. Spread out, Schoolis said quietly as they entered one of the pitch-black canyons. This canyon's unmapped. We need to look for sign. Sign meant Olar caves, Olar tracks. Henry silently headed to the right, Schoolis to the left. That left Wickford following Pricey over the stony ground. Every so often, Pricey would stop, crouch, touch the ground, move a stone or two. Wickford couldn't tell what the older patrol was doing, but he couldn't let Pricey, of all people, know that. They continued on, silent, dark figures moving through the near blackness. Wickford found himself watching the sky, the stars, as they disappeared one at a time over the bumpy rim of the canyon. He had steeled himself long ago to the dark, yet somehow the half-light scared him more. But he needed 2 night missions above ground to qualify for tunnel duty near the city. And there was that stupid dare with Henry. He looked around as he walked, trailing Pricey. The stone here was worn down over centuries, millennia maybe. Wickford didn't know. Hadn't really cared to know about this type of thing when he was in patrol school. But now he was curious as to why it was so lumpy, like dozens of fingers sticking out of the ground, each so big that 20 men could encircle it. In the sunlight, he knew the spires were striped, different shades of rock worn down over time. And the rock at night was almost cold, beautifully so. He wanted to lean on it, even in this chilly air. No wonder the Olar lived in caves. He fell behind a little as they made their slow way down the canyon. He felt a little better now, safer. His eyes were beginning to adjust, and he could see well enough to tell that this canyon was likely abandoned. It was bone dry, for one thing, and the steep angle of the sides meant that the sun would probably hit the ground at maximum intensity for more hours during the day than was safe. He had read his safety manuals, he thought proudly, even if he hadn't had much of a chance to go above ground. As he drifted over the rocky canyon floor, he looked for sign, which could be anything out of place. A trail over the rocks, a pattern of gravel fall that looked unnatural. The Olar didn't leave clear tracks for the most part, but if he knew what to look for. He glanced up and stopped in his tracks. The canyon had turned while he'd been wandering, and it now opened onto the glowing path of the Milky Way in all its stunning shimmer and glory. For a moment, Wickford forgot where he was. He'd only heard of it. It hadn't been visible the last time he'd been up above. He gaped. With me, Schoolis's voice drifted back, startling Wickford. The young patrol looked up, then behind him at the nearly invisible entrance to the canyon. He suddenly realized how far behind he was, how isolated. Henry was all but invisible up ahead in the darkness, the medic trailing after him. Schoolis had taken the tracker with him and couldn't even be seen. Even Pricey. Behind him, Wickford thought he heard a sound. A trickle of rock, a footstep maybe. His fascination with the Milky Way His fascination with the Milky Way vanished, replaced by gut-wrenching terror. The Olar could be there, right behind him, maybe even a group, and he was alone. His hands felt like ice. He broke into a run, scrambling over the rocks as he made a beeline for the others. As he did, he tripped over something and went flying, making a racket as he went down hard, his gear scattering. The entire group of patrol turned around. "It's the newbie," he heard one of them mutter angrily. He lay there, frozen. He'd lost his canteen and his knife. He'd heard them both fall somewhere in the darkness. Schoolis would probably be furious, he thought. But Wickford didn't care because he was staring at a skull. That is it. Thank you for listening.